Hi, I'm Elaine. This is Elaine's XYZ, a vlog that's currently coming at you from New York City, a hotel in New York City. So I moved to the United States in December from Shanghai and moseyed on over to the East Coast in January after spending some time with my family in San Francisco. I moved with nothing more than 2 suitcases and a cat. The cat is in San Francisco still right now while I apartment hunt in New York. And now, after just about 2 weeks here, I found an apartment. That's a huge relief to me, considering most of my research was telling me that I might have to see dozens upon dozens of places and be outbid constantly whenever I found some place that I actually liked. I was really bracing myself for weeks of disappointment and distress, but somehow things worked out. And so for the fun of it, and because it seems to be a full-on genre on YouTube, New York apartment hunt videos I figured I would show you all what I did and saw and eventually chose. Speaking of which, I don't know if I'm being recommended specifically weird videos in this genre, but I am a mid-career, relatively successful professional, I think, and I was experiencing hella sticker shock watching these videos. Who are these early young 20-somethings who are able to afford a doorman building in Chelsea? When I was in my early 20s here in New York on my starter journalist salary, not only was I living with roommates to save money, I was also putting myself into some really weird rental situations. Did I ever tell you about the time that I was living in what was essentially a walk-in closet in Bushwick? It was a loft that was definitely not zoned for residential, and the buzzer to the entire apartment was inside my room, so they had actually carved out a little square on the wall that people would reach into in order to buzz their friends into the apartment. How are those wacky situations not making it onto YouTube? Anyways, it's like a dozen years later and I am still not willing to shell out for renting luxury living here. So this is not going to be that kind of apartment hunt video. My acceptable price point is apparently a lot lower than a teenage influencer's. Well, we have the whole rest of the video to get into it. Speaking of which, first of all, what were my criteria? Which I started out thinking would be kind of unrealistic, but I wanted to try for anyways. I absolutely wanted 2 bedrooms for myself. I have a lot of friends and relatives who are very excited to hang out with me here in New York City, and I wanted to be able to host them while giving them the ability to have some privacy and me the ability to also have some privacy. I needed the neighborhood to have close by amenities, subway lines, supermarkets, other regular shopping, because I am incredibly paranoid about Amazon deliveries not actually being able to make it to me here. That's a culture shock thing, I think. In China, nobody steals your Taobao deliveries. I also wanted it to be close to at least 2 or 3 bougie restaurants because
I'm bougie.
I wanted it to look out on greenery, or at least be very close walking distance to greenery. I've lived in New York City in very industrial neighborhoods before. While I probably could manage, it does get a little bit depressing to not be able to see a tree out of any of your windows. To know that if you wanted to be in open air in nature, you would actually have to take transport to get there. And most importantly of all, I didn't want to pay more than $2,500, which, coming from an apartment that cost about $1,200 in Shanghai, was already more than doubling what my rent was going to be. But I was actually in what's considered a cheaper rental in Shanghai, which is a much cheaper city to live in compared to New York in general. So I was emotionally prepared to devote more of my paycheck to rent, but not all of it. So if that sounds like the kind of criteria that you would also keep in your mind, hopefully this video is actually kind of exciting for you. Okay, so you probably know this already, but there are 2 major parks in New York City that are considered world-class, and they both happen to be designed by the same guy. Frederick Law Olmsted. He's a really fascinating character, by the way, and if you have a chance to watch a TV show or read a book about him, I'd highly recommend it. He revolutionized the world of park design, not just through his winning combination of respecting the natural ecosystem while at the same time providing pleasant pathways for both pedestrian traffic and carriage traffic, but also by adamantly pushing the idea of a public park to begin with. He's basically responsible for Central Park belonging to everybody in the city, not just the rich people. But I digress. Because of my greenery prerequisite, I focused my search around two areas, Central Park and Prospect Park. That actually automatically put me in two completely different neighborhoods than what I had been living in my 20s. I'd spent some time in Greenwich Village and also in, as aforementioned, Bushwick. To find these places, I downloaded Trulia and Street Easy and kept an eye on Craigslist. I also signed up for the Listings project, which is useful, I think, if you're searching for roommates, but I didn't want roommates, so I have lived alone for a good 5 years now and have no intention of stopping. But if you are looking for roommates and you happen to be in the media profession, as a lot of the people on the Listings project seem to be, that's a great place for you to look. Most of what I ended up seeing came from Trulia, which I think might be part of that whole Zillow conglomerate. And there are other apps out there that I found later. Localize.city seems to pull a lot of really great listings as well. But by the time that I was thinking of messaging some of those, real estate agents were getting back to me on Trulia anyways. I concentrated my search on North Central Park because I figured and was proven that there were probably very slim pickings anywhere below 80th Street, and by Prospect Park, Brooklyn, so Prospect Lefferts Gardens, Park Slope, etc. I ended up contacting 20 apartments and seeing about 7 or 8, and here are some of them. So let's talk about the Upper East Side first. Or I guess East Harlem as it's called now? Was it always called East Harlem? I almost never went above 72nd Street when I was living here in my 20s. I ended up seeing 3 apartments there that I think are pretty indicative of what stock they have. The first one I saw was a 2-bedroom, but just way too small. It was a 2-bedroom in the way of, if I took this hotel room and added some walls, this could also be considered a 2-bedroom. Besides that, it was also a 5th floor walk-up, but I looked at it anyways because it was $2,200. There's not much I can say about it except for that it was one of the first apartments I saw, so I was like, I guess this was what I was expecting from this house hunt, but I better see some other stuff. Thank God I did, because the next one I saw was actually okay, and 3 bedrooms for $2,400 and a bit. This one actually did stay in my consideration list for quite a while because it was 3 bedrooms and the 3 bedrooms were all around the same size, and besides that it also did have a living room area that was at least big enough to put a table and some seating in. But all of the windows just looked out to other apartments, and the walk from there to Central Park actually turned out to be a little unpleasant. I'm glad I made it just to check. It was going through a lot of other apartment complexes, and then you had to walk along the park edge for another 2 blocks or so before you could actually reach a place where you could go into the park. Plus, it was on the 4th floor of a walk-up. And while a part of me was like, I guess I could probably use the exercise, another more realistic part of me was like, bringing groceries up this is going to get old really fast. But again, 3 bedrooms for $2,400. I was a little heartened. The third place I saw was actually right by the park, and it was definitely one of my top contenders this entire search. It was more of a 1-bedroom plus a junior, and there wasn't quite enough room in the living kitchen area to have both a dining table and a sofa. And it was at the very top of my price range at $2,500, but I could have made it work because at my doorstep would have been the north entrance to the park, right there on Duke Ellington Circle. And with the fresh snowfall and all the ducks and just, just generally Central Park's natural beauty, it was very charming. A little extra concerning though was the lack of supermarkets in the area, or really any other kind of necessity shopping. There was one Dunkin' Donuts on one street corner, and otherwise the neighbor was a correctional facility, which hilariously has some good reviews on Google Maps. So yeah, that was the Upper East Side, which I chose not to live in. A part of me really would have loved to be that close to Museum Mile, but none of those apartments really made me feel like the trade-off was worth it. Now for what the stock was like near Prospect Park. Well, more specifically just south of the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and kind of in the north side of Flatbush in this area called Prospect Lefferts Gardens. It seemed to be the cheapest area around the park, and so with numerous 2 to 3 bedroom options within my price range. Well, so let's start with the positive. The buildings there were very beautiful. I really enjoyed walking amongst these turn-of-the-century constructions. I didn't realize this until researching it later, but that entire area is kind of considered a historic district. And a lot of the buildings that I was seeing were created in the Jazz Age, right after the city had begun mandating non-tenement apartment sizes. And at least 2 apartments in this area were correspondingly quite beautiful themselves. So the first one I saw was located on Crook Avenue, so northern Flatbush, on this very quiet residential street. It was $2,250, very solid construction. I really liked this blue kitchen that they had. You could tell that it was recently renovated by somebody who had some sort of modern sense of style. But it was actually a 1-bedroom, and it was on the first floor looking out at the street. As a woman who's living alone, I guess I was kind of worried about it being really easy for people to spy in, especially since the area of Prospect Lefferts Gardens / North Flatbush turns out to not be that safe. Apparently the violent crime rate is pretty high compared to the city in general, and I looked it up later and a dude was shot on his doorstep in that block in August 2020. And it being on this quiet residential street was also kind of a problem because there wasn't anything like a bodega or a supermarket or any other kind of necessity purchasing for at least 3 or 4 blocks. So if I had to make some sort of emergency run here at night, I kind of felt like it'd be a little scary walking through this area, especially since I also noticed I was one of the few Asian people on the street. I got the feeling getting off the subway, considering like black people turn one way and white people turn the other, that this area is actually kind of segregated, and I would definitely, absolutely be the obvious gentrifier of my building. I mean, I'd like to think that I would try to do what I can to actually be a part of the community and not just be somebody who took up space and kicked people out, but the second one that I saw was around Ocean Avenue, really close by, and I think I would consider this one of my top contenders too. It was a 2-bedroom for just $2,100, though like my Central Park fave, one of the rooms was much more of a junior bedroom. Sorry if this video is really dark, by the way. The power was turned off and it was around 5 o'clock, it was getting dark, so I was basically wandering through this place in waning light. But if you can see through the graininess of the low light vision, you can see that the perks of this place were that the construction was relatively new and modern and pretty good quality, and the ceilings were incredibly high. Plus, it was more or less on the first floor, but it was looking out into the building, into this garden area, so it was actually quiet and private. But it was still roughly in the same area as the Crook Avenue location and carried the same problems of like lack of neighborhood goods that the Crook Avenue apartment had. The third place I saw around this area that was possible was on a main thoroughfare. So less character, more what you'd regularly see in shoddy New York construction, but much closer to amenities. It was 3 bedrooms for $2,200 and got lots of sunshine. And looking through these pictures, I was actually kind of like, oh, why did I nix this one? But then I remembered it was on a 4th floor walk-up. And while the floors do look okay in the video, I remember them being noticeably flimsy when I was stepping on them. Like, it felt kind of disconcerting to have like a bit of a bounce on top of the laminate every time you walked. It was this like unsettling feeling of, is this gonna collapse on me? And I believe that feeling was why I was like, no thanks in the end. Unfortunately, with all of these apartments around the Prospect Park area, it turns out that they're not actually that close to entering Prospect Park as you would think. I guess I never noticed because I've never really lived here before, but there were actually incredibly high walls between the road and the park, and very few actual gates to get into the park. So even if an apartment said that it was like a block away, if you factored in the time it would take for you to actually walk to a gateway, it was usually like 5 or 6 or 7 blocks away, really. And so, what neighborhood did I choose to live in? Well, plot twist, neither actually. Okay, so while I was emailing every apartment that I could find under $2,500 next to those 2 parks, I suddenly remembered that I had actually helped out a friend who was living in an area called Sunset Park. He was running for office and wanted some help translating some of his brochures into Chinese language for the large Chinese immigrant community that lives there. The area in general is about 30-something% Asian, 30-something% Hispanic, and then 30-something% everyone else. And when I looked on a map, I was like, well, Sunset Park itself is kind of small, kind of cute, but what's this big green space right next to it? It's a huge-ass historic cemetery. Okay, if you are afraid of ghosts or incredibly superstitious, I could see how this would be a deal breaker for you. But if you were kind of a secret goth in high school, it's not so bad. Plus, it turns out that the Greenwood Cemetery is actually kind of a really cool New York site. There's 478 acres of natural landscape, stunning Gothic architecture, and allegedly a lot of birds. Great birding place. I'm not a birder, but I could see myself becoming one. They have guided walking tours and even jazz festivals in their catacombs, and there are some celebrities interred there. There's the famous composer Leonard Bernstein, the infamous Tammany Hall politician William Mager Boss Tweed, several members of the Roosevelt family, and the most cool, neo-expressionist Jean-Michel Basquiat. And literally the moment I looked around there, I think I found it. A 3-bedroom apartment, well, more like 2 bedrooms and a junior, but 2 big bedrooms and a junior. Also a living area that was big enough for both a sofa seating area and a dining table, plus a big kitchen, like double the size of anything else I saw. 2nd floor walk-up and $2,400. Now, it's not a perfect place. There is no laundry in the building, so I will have to start using laundromats again. And the giant kitchen, unfortunately, comes with some very outdated cherry wood cabinets and black granite countertops. Apparently, it was just renovated, but whoever had done the renovating had an aesthetic clearly out of like the most basic people from the early 2000s. Oh, I guess we don't say basic anymore. I guess we say chuggy. But it's big, it's bright mostly. It's near greenery, even if it happens to be greenery that's a graveyard. And it turned out to be really near to this completely bougie new area called Industry City, which contains not just a fancy Mediterranean supermarket, but also a fancy Japanese supermarket and like a dozen or so fancy restaurants and bars and whiskey tasting rooms, and which itself happens to be located right next to a Costco. So no, it's not a doorman building, though apparently the landlord also does own the deli downstairs. And it's definitely not some fancy Manhattan address, but it's 25 minutes door to door to Midtown, a commute which includes a really beautiful Manhattan Bridge crossing. It checks basically all of my boxes, and I think it shows you what you can get in New York if you're willing to look around a little bit in the middle of winter, right after a bomb cyclone snowstorm. I don't know if it would be better in the spring or fall, much nicer New York weather. I'm obviously not looking during then, and I probably won't be. If you have any idea what seasonal timing does to rental prices, please leave it in the comments below. In any case, I hope you found that useful. I can't wait to decorate and DIY this place up. I have been watching a lot of HGTV while I've been in this hotel room. I think that's what I'm going to be turning this channel into. If you want to follow along, hit like and subscribe. You can find me off of YouTube on my newsletter or my Instagram, and see you next time doing whatever it is I happen to be doing.